In 2007, a man walked into the morning fog outside his home in northern Oregon. He was never seen again. But 3 days later, his boots were found neatly placed on his porch. The town of Elbridge sits quietly between the forest and the sea. It's not a place you'll find on most maps. It's home to just a few hundred people, a single gas station, and a post office that closes early on Thursdays. Locals will tell you the fog there rolls in like a tide, slow, deliberate, and heavy. It's not the kind of fog that lifts by noon. It lingers, clings to the trees, and muffles all sound like a thick woolen blanket. In the fall of 2007, Elbridge was quiet as ever. The leaves had turned, the air smelled of pine and salt, and the mornings were cold enough to see your breath. People went about their routines. Coffee at the diner, fishing at the inlet, kids walking to school with backpacks that looked too big for their small shoulders. One of those people was Thomas Ellery. He lived alone in a small cedar house at the edge of town, just past the old mill road. He was 42, worked part-time at the library, and spent most evenings reading on his porch with a blanket over his knees. Thomas wasn't a recluse, but he kept to himself. He was polite, soft-spoken, and always seemed a little distant. He'd lived in Elbridge for nearly 20 years, and though few knew much about his past, everyone agreed he was a kind man. He had a habit of walking every single morning, just after sunrise. Always the same route, down the gravel path behind his house, through the woods, and back before breakfast. He once said it helped him think. On October 12th, the fog was especially thick, the kind that turns towering trees into mere shadows and car headlights into faint, glowing orbs. Thomas stepped out onto his porch at precisely 6:14 a.m., wearing his usual jacket and boots. He locked the door behind him, tucked his hands into his pockets, and walked directly into the mist. He never came back. That morning, the fog was heavier than anyone could remember. Neighbors later described it as looking like smoke dents, swirling, almost unnatural. It swallowed the trees whole, blurred the power lines into nothing, and turned the gravel road into a pale ribbon that simply vanished into the woods. Only one person saw him leave. Mrs. Halpern, who lived across the road, said she saw Thomas pause at the edge of his yard. He looked toward the woods for a long moment, then just walked forward and disappeared into the fog. At the time, she didn't think much of it. It was just Thomas on his morning walk. By noon, the fog still hadn't lifted. The town felt muted, like someone had turned down the volume of the entire world. At the library, Thomas's absence wasn't immediately alarming. He sometimes took a day off without notice. The next morning, a subtle concern began to grow. His porch light was still on. The mail from the previous day hadn't been collected. And then there were his boots. The same pair he wore every single morning for his walk, sitting neatly side by side on his porch. That one detail unsettled people more than anything else. Thomas never walked barefoot. He was a meticulous man, always dressed for the weather, always prepared. The sheriff was called. A search was organized. Volunteers from all over combed the woods, calling his name, checking old logging trails and creek beds. They found nothing. No footprints, no scraps of clothing, no wallet, no sign of a struggle. Just the boots perfectly dry, clean, and placed with an eerie sense of care. The fog finally lifted on the third day. The woods looked ordinary again, the trees solid and real. But Thomas was gone. The official search lasted for 5 days. People came from nearby towns to help, some with tracking dogs, others with just flashlights and a glimmer of hope. They dragged the creek, they checked every ravine, they mapped the entire forest. Still nothing. The sheriff's office kept a thin file on the case. A few photographs, Thomas's library ID, and a map with red circles marking the search zones. There was no evidence. There were no sightings. There was no reason for a man to just vanish. Slowly, the town tried to move on. The porch light on Thomas's house was turned off, and the boots, still impossibly clean, still dry, were taken into evidence by the sheriff. Then, 3 weeks later, a boy named Caleb found something in the woods. He was playing near the old mill road when he spotted a paperback book lying open on a stump. The pages were completely dry. The spine was cracked, as if someone had just been reading it. Inside, on the title page, was a name, Thomas Ellery. It was a copy of Asterisk, The Sea and the Silence Asterisk, a novel Thomas had checked out from the library just 2 days before he vanished. The library had already marked it overdue. No one had seen it since. The sheriff took the book. It was examined and photographed. There were no fingerprints, no signs of weathering from the elements. It was just a book, sitting there, as if someone had placed it there on purpose for Caleb to find. Then came the second coincidence. Marla, who worked at the diner, claimed she'd seen Thomas, or at least someone who looked just like him 2 nights before the book was found. She was closing up for the night when she saw a man standing across the street, motionless, just watching the diner. He wore a jacket like the one Thomas owned, but she said his face was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes, they looked wrong, not scared, not angry, just empty, distant. The sheriff checked the security footage from the camera across the street. There was nothing, no man, no movement at all. Marla insisted she knew what she saw. And after that, the sightings began. A fleeting figure in the woods. A man standing by the creek, always silent, always alone, but never close enough for anyone to be sure. Some townsfolk said it was just grief playing tricks on their eyes. Others whispered it was a shared guilt. But a few believed Thomas had never really left, that he was still out there, somewhere in the fog, watching. 5 years passed. The little cedar house on Mill Road remained empty. The siding faded from brown to gray. The porch light never turned on again. Then, one cold winter morning, the boots returned. They were placed neatly on the porch, side by side, exactly as they had been before. There was no note, no explanation, and no one saw who left them. The sheriff eventually retired. The thin file was boxed up and stored in the back of the station. The book Caleb found sat on a library shelf, its spine cracked, its title faded. People stopped talking about Thomas Ellery. The diner changed owners. The fog still came, thick and white, but no one dared to walk into it anymore. Then, in the fall of 2014, something strange happened. A letter arrived at the post office. It had no return address, no stamp. It was just a folded piece of paper inside a blank envelope. It read, "I remember the trees. I remember the silence. I remember walking, and then not walking. I don't know where I am, but I think I'm still here." The handwriting was shaky. The ink was smudged, but the signature at the bottom was clear. Thomas Ellery. The retired sheriff said it looked real. He said it felt asterisk real, but there was no way to prove it. The letter was placed in the file with the photographs and the map, and the file was closed for good. Some disappearances leave behind questions. Others leave behind only silence, but the ones that truly linger are the ones that feel like someone is still watching. Because sometimes the fog doesn't just take, it keeps. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as unsettling as I did, consider subscribing for more mysteries. Until next time, stay safe and maybe stay out of the fog.